Right. Awesome. We are off to a good start here. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Play a little bit of this. There we go. Play a little bit of that.
1, 2, 3. In the land of cotton, old time there, I'll not forgotten. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. Dixie's land where I was born in early on one frosty morning. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. There I wish I was in Dixie, hooray, hooray. In Dixie's land I'll take my stand to live and die in Dixie, away, away, away down south of Dixie, away, away, away down south of Dixie. Old Mrs. Mary, William, even William was a gay deceiver. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. And when he put his arms around her, smiled as fierce as a 40-pounder. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. And I wish I was in Dixie, hooray, hooray. In Dixie's land I'll take my stand to live and die in Dixie, away, away, away down south of Dixie, away, away, away down south of Dixie. His face was sharp as a butcher's cleaver, but that did not seem to grieve her. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. Our Mrs. acted the foolish part. She died for a man that broke her heart. So look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. Then I wish I was in Dixie, hooray, hooray. In Dixie's land I'll take my stand, live and die in Dixie, away, away, away down south of Dixie, away, away, away down south of Dixie. With the help of the next old missus and the gals that wanna kiss us. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. And if you wanna drive away sorrow, come and hear our song tomorrow. Look away, look away, look away.
All right. I think that's a good enough introduction. So, this is the first anniversary of the Norman in America. Also, I am now back up to the same number of subscribers that I had when my first channel was taken down. So, we need to have a bit of a celebration in this regards. I am now back up to the same number of subs that I had on my old channel, finally. Now, I had about 220 subs at the time that my old channel was deleted or taken down. So, I'm still a few subscribers short. So, I'm going to not do a celebration about that just yet. But when I get to 220 subs, we'll have a stream where I celebrate, I'm back to my old channel growth, Now, this doesn't take into account the 7 months that I could have had, where I could have perhaps gotten up to, like, I don't know, 800, 600 subs on my old channel by now. But it's not good to linger on in the past. So, yeah, a year ago, 1 year ago today, I was reading about The Norman in America by George Fitzhugh, or Fitzhugh. It is now the 1st-year anniversary of that. It's a pretty good read, if you're ever interested in it. So I think, yeah. I think I'm going to talk about Southern civilization and the nature of what Southern civilization really is about. If you want to even call it that. Mr. Cushman, Michael Cushman, he's done a pretty good analysis about the distinctions of the American South. I haven't read his book, The South, Its History and Its Future, and his kind of agrario-futurism stuff, but I would kind of agree with quite a lot of his stuff. Now, Texas is a little bit different from South Carolina. You know, he's, of course, focusing on the eastern seaboard, and Texas kind of had a bit of a different variation of that culture later in the 1800s when it started to form here, or when the southern cultivation culture reached that point. But yeah, this is the 1 year anniversary of the Norman in America. And how impromptu it is to see Burger Boy come in the chat and say Happy July the 4th. You do know that that is an insult to my people, Burger Boy. That's a sign of military occupation and oppression against my race and my tribe and my people and my clan, Burger Boy. I've seen you talk about how America is a melting pot and that immigrants impacted and had a great contribution to this country. And I've seen you talk about how wonderful atheism is and how America is not or shouldn't be a Christian nation. Yeah, I've seen a lot of your shit, Burger Boy. And that doesn't even go into the personal things that you've tried to do against me. So it makes sense that you're trying to derail the discussion, like how he always does, you know. You know, just exactly like how he always does. Trying to derail the discussion. And, you know, him and Toxic both hate the history of my people. They both despise and hate white Southerners and white people in general. They look down on us and they see us as like lower than they are or whatever. You know, they look down on us when we had a superior civilization, you know. Yeah, I'm not going to be nice to that. Let's see here. Where in the hell is The Norman in America by George Fitzhugh? Let's see here. Let's see here. I see the superiority of southern races. Man. Jeez. They make this so hard to find. Let's see here. Yeah, I can't find it on Wikipedia. And no, I'm not going to be reading the Wikipedia article. Oh, good heavens, no. Here it is. The Spectre of Salem. Oh, that's what it was. Southern Civilization, or the Norman in America. I see now. J. Quitman Moore. Let's see, Devoe's review. Okay, that's why I couldn't find it. Alright, here we go. Maybe we'll find it. I'm going to come visit you in November, Warhammer. Sure, man. Awesome, bro. I don't mind that. I don't mind you coming at all, bro. Alright. 1 year anniversary. So this is DeBoe's review. This was recorded in January and February of 1862. So, Southern Civilization, or the Norman in America, by George Fitzhugh. The philosophy of history finds no more conspicuous or forcible illustration than that presented in the rise, progress, and final consolidation into a vital nationality. Oh, those grand ideas, the gift of a former age and the monuments of a historic race, that have but lately torn a continent asunder, and revived the traditional glory of the cavalier on the theatre, which has been called to exhibit the grand drama of a nation's life, abruptly concluded with the first fitful and inauspicious act, and seated amid the prostrate columns and broken arches of the once stately edifice, the political inquirer is at but little loss to discover the deep causes that have affected the mighty overthrow, and in tracing them back to their original sources, these active agents of dissolution and decay will be found to lose themselves in the exciting events and transactions of that brilliant and memorable era of English history, embraced in the eventful reigns of the proud sovereigns of the houses of Tudor and Stuart. The overthrow of the great feudal aristocracy of England marked the commencement of a revolution in the British Constitution, which in one brief century beheld the whole mass of political power, once shared between the king and parliament, transferred to the crown. Under the Plantagenet princes, the government of England was more an aristocracy than a monarchy, and the conflict was carried out between the crown and the great barons, headed by such chiefs as Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, who often united with the people against the throne, and not infrequently overawed majesty itself. But under the Tudors, the government made an approach to the absolute type, and sought to center in itself the scattered rays of civil jurisdiction. But while this rapid centralization of authority was going on in the crown and the great vassals, once kingmakers, and the haughty compeers of kings, and the haughty co-peers of kings, while descending to the condition of subjects, a great power was growing up in the body of the nation, destined in the course of a few centuries to convulse it to its center. The free towns which had sprung up at intervals from the bosom of feudal society, and taken their place in the new social organization, became the great centers of art and trade, and introduced a new element into society, the moneyed power, which was not long in finding its way into the higher sphere of government and politics. Nobility, which in the 16th century had been held above price, became in the 17th a marketable commodity, and James I established and carried on a profitable traffic in titles. Henry VIII, the ablest and most arbitrary of the long line of Tudor sovereigns, had, by repudiating the Vatican and assuming the matra, carried the prerogatives of the crown to a degree formidable to the liberties of the subject, and transferred against his own throne the opposition and enmity which the Lollard or Puritan sectarians, afterward a powerful and triumphant party, had previously directed against the See of Rome, and by throwing England outside the pale of the Catholic nations, he had offered violence to that great principle of race which has given the Celtic or Latin, of which the Norman is the most powerful branch, and the Teutonic or Saxon nations, distinct and opposite destinies. The former inclining to monarchy or aristocracy and Catholicity, the latter to representative institutions and Protestantism. The Norman had conquered the Anglo-Saxon, and during the long dynasty of the Plantagenets maintained his supremacy among the nations, and stood at the head of European civilization. But with the rise of the commercial spirit under the reign of Henry VIII, and its double alliance with the democratic principle and the genius of a lawless, intolerant, and proscriptive semi-religious fanaticism, commenced the attempted conquest of the Norman by the Saxon, which, prosecuted with various success under the reigns of Mary, Elizabeth, and James, finally gained a violent and bloody triumph in the overthrow and execution of the unfortunate Charles Stuart. Is my stream working? Yeah, it's going on. Hey, what's up, guys? All right. To such has content themselves with more exoteric views of history without investigating its more hidden esoteric phenomena, the separation of Henry from the communion of Rome, to such has obtained a closer and more interior view of the motives, measures, and policy of that reign. The course of that great monarch will be found to have been guided mainly by powerful and controlling political considerations. Princes and cabinets know too well the use of the religious element in the economy of society to become themselves the blind dupes of its vagaries. Hume represents Henry and Elizabeth as being Protestants, more from necessity than conviction, and sectary. Hold on a second. Is it sectarians or sacraments? Oh, and sacrificing their own preferences and prejudices, if indeed they had any, to great and imperious exigencies of state. They had any to great and imperious exigencies of state. A period had finally arrived in the progress of civilization when it had become necessary to subordinate the ecclesiastical to the civil jurisdiction, in order to preserve the integrity and solidarity of the nationalities from the absorbing and centralizing tendency of the great Roman colossus that had danced the infancy of modern society on its knee, and conducted it safely through the long night of the Middle Age, only to seek to fetter the strong limbs of its manhood by the swaddling clothes of the nursery. That period fell in the reign of the great Tudor king, and he met the occasion with all the vigor and courage of his great and unmatched faculties. The chair of St. Peter claimed and exercised the right of appointing Italian bishops to the vacant English sees, and of compelling the potentates of Europe to do homage to the papal nuncio, two impositions that were cheerfully submitted to, so long as they symbolized a submission to the merely spiritual supremacy of the Roman pontiff. But when the grasping power of the hierarchy, stimulated by the genius of the great Hildebrand, set up its claim to the exercise of a temporal jurisdiction over Christendom, a chord of exquisite sensibility was touched, which vibrated to the heart of Europe. The great principle of nationality was assailed. The Saxon love of independence, the Norman pride of empire and command, the deep and ineradicable instinct and prejudice of race received a smarting wound, and Henry decided to make his marriage the instrument for effecting a separation from Rome. He declared England forever independent of the Holy See, subordinated the ecclesiastical to the civil power, and leveled every barrier that stood in the way of augmenting the royal authority. Wolsey, the last, ablest, and most powerful of the great ecclesiastics who acted as prime ministers to the crown, was banished. His successors, More and Cromwell, were condemned to the scaffold, and Protestants and Catholics were persecuted with equal severity. The divorce between the ecclesiastical and civil polity was final and complete, and the executive branch of the government, by being armed with the formidable legislative power of taxation, in the right granted it of levying tonnage and poundage at will, grew to such threatening proportions as to overthrow the other departments of the public administration and destroy the balance of the ancient constitution. The House of Lords shared the legislative functions with the throne, and was at the same time the supreme judicator of the land, yet never acted but to register the decisions of the crown, and the Commons House of Parliament met and held its sessions only by the extremest courtesy. Henry was an admirer of the polity of the Roman Church, and would have preferred to have continued in its communion. Had it been content to confine its jurisdiction to spiritual matters, and had the social condition of England not suggested and compelled the idea of a separation as a matter of royal policy, but it the right of nominating foreigners to the vacant English sees were allowed the court of Rome, England would be speedily denationalized, inasmuch as it would be suffering a foreign government to exercise legislative functions within its own jurisdiction. Since by the Constitution of England bishops were created spiritual lords, and sat in parliament with the temporal peers. The Catholic hierarchy had, from the small pastoral patrimony of St. Peter, grown to the dimensions of a great and powerfully organized temporal government, building up its gigantic power on the basis of an immense superstition, thrusting itself at every turn into the affairs of nations, and animated by the grand idea of obliterating the boundaries of great states, striking down the nationalities and founding on the site of the ancient pagan civilization a huge, colossal, and centralized despotism that aspired to march under the banner of Catholic unity to the empire of the world. The conception was worthy of Hildebrand, but its failure will stand a perpetual monument to the indestructibility of the sentiment of nationality and the vital and indomitable power of the genius and instinct of race. But Henry repudiated the despotic domination of Rome only to establish a more centralized authority at home. He was not unaware that by creating himself Pope, he would fall to all the odium attaching to that office, but was complacent in the thought that he would be at least an English pontiff, and would cause the junction of the civil and ecclesiastical authority to contribute still further to the enlargement of the royal power. He succeeded and gave to England an administration at once vigorous, splendid, and arbitrary, and his reign may be fixed upon as the seed time of the modern political parties, especially of those celebrated historical organizations known as Whig and Tory, Roundhead and Cavalier. Wycliffe had ushered in the Reformation in England by preaching against the Pope of Rome. The successors of Wycliffe now continued the Reformation by preaching against the Pope of England. But Henry knew his strength and put down opposition with a violent arm, while attempting to carry out on a more limited theater the chimerical idea of Hildebrand, of creating a powerful and united empire out of distinct races, and opposite and antagonist forms of civilization. The blood of the Saxon continued still to beat strongly in the veins of feudal England, while the banner of the Norman, the proud emblem of authority, flaunted from the battlements of the conqueror. True to the ideas and instincts of his northern origin, the Saxon clung to that fierce and lawless individualism in state and that stern, gloomy, and impracticable idealism in church, which his rude Teutonic fathers brought with them from the wild Hercynian forests. And when the ecclesiastical power of England was withdrawn from the Vatican and transferred to Canterbury, this Saxon element became the fortress and arsenal of that violent and fanatical party of political and religious revolutionists, known as Puritans, Independents, or Presbyterians, who opposed equally the English establishment as an infringement upon the rights of conscience, and the civil government as an enemy to individual liberty. The Puritan became to Protestantism what the Jesuit was to Catholicism, the slave to one despotic idea, and the secret foe to all government, society, and institutions that stood between him and the consummation of his gigantic conception. To this party eagerly attached themselves all that restless, selfish, arrogant, and ambitious class, which commerce had elevated to sudden importance, with no principle but their passions, no opinion but their interests, and no faith but their fanaticism, and the machinations of this Presbyterian or Puritan party was but the Herculean effort of the Saxon to wrest from the Norman the scepter of empire, making religious fanaticism only the cloak for concealing his political designs. It reared its crest against the authority and majesty of the religious sect, but for the reason that it was a public enemy, committing treason against the state. It was in the designs and pretensions of this party that the inquisitorial tribunals of the High Commission and Star Chamber had their origin, and when the interior history of the reigns of the sovereigns of the houses of Tudor and Stuart is studied, discovery will be made that much of what had the appearance of being arbitrary and despotic in their administrations was but the result of an honest endeavor to uphold the government against the assaults of this revolutionary faction. Arbitrary as they were, these two extraordinary courts fully accomplished the object of their institution. They broke the power and spirit of a dangerous and formidable party, and drove many of its most turbulent and discontented spirits to found a colony on the shores of Massachusetts Bay. The power of the Norman in England was still supreme when the morning of the 17th century found Charles Stuart seated on the British throne. There, in all save the Petition of Right, stood the English Constitution, just as Henry VIII had left it, the throne standing in ice wherever the eye might turn it was. Met by evidences of a social and material progress, far in advance of the political and intellectual development. The physical features of the country even were no longer the same. Commerce and the arts had built up large towns, and drawn to these more active centers of industry and enterprise a large part of the rural population, whose former occupation had been the exclusive cultivation of the soil. Communication between place and place had increased, and the ancient cities, long stationary in population and trade, grew to great and sudden opulence. Nor were the social changes less marked than the physical. Villanage had almost wholly disappeared, and the dignities of church and state had become more accessible to worth and merit. Great talents and meritorious services were not infrequently rewarded. The contemplation of the social phenomena to a survey of the political institutions of the country. It required no remarkable strength of observation to discover there were two distinct nationalities existing on the soil of Great Britain, and of the two the Norman was the ruler, the Teutonic and the Latin, the northern and the southern types of civilization, with their diverse social systems, their incompatibility of ideas, opinions, and institutions,